Is everyone good to go? Thank you, Jeremy. Great. Good morning. Here in Cairns, we've just had a local disaster management group meeting, and then we've dialed into the Queensland Disaster Management Committee meeting at Kedron Park at the State Disaster Coordination Centre there. 35 localities in the far north remain isolated in the wake of the flooding disaster that followed ex-tropical cyclone Jasper. Police have gained access to many of those communities and not identified any critically injured persons. That really is the miracle of this event, an event so big, and as far as we know at this stage, no loss of life. We do continue to hold grave fears for that 85-year-old man who went missing in Dagara, who was reported missing from Dagara. Police have accessed his property, but still not been able to locate him. The QPS report that they're no longer receiving life-threatening, life-endangering calls for service, but a number of vessels remain on call for if they are required. The mass evacuation of Wujal and Dagara continues, moving that community, large numbers of that community from Wujal to Cooktown. 97 people were evacuated yesterday. Those two Chinooks, I understand, are in the air now, moving personnel into position and removing residents back to Cooktown. The 3 evacuation centres that remain open are in Mossman, Edmonton and Cooktown. In total, there's 62 people currently in those centres, 43 at Cooktown, largely those evacuated residents. Today, we have even more resources flooding into the state's far north to do damage assessments and to relieve fatigued officers. We continue to rely on the ADF and particularly those Chinooks are allowing us to get personnel into those isolated communities. A number of roads remain closed. The Bruce Highway between Townsville and Cairns remains open. The Captain Cook Highway between Cairns and Smithfield is open, but drivers are urged to take care. The access road to Yorkeys Knob is also open, but again, drivers are urged to take care. Access to Holloways and Machan's Beach is restricted to emergency vehicles and local traffic only. There continues to be flooded roads, and so they can't even be assessed until those floodwaters recede. Again, we say to anyone driving around the region, if it's flooded, forget it. You're not only taking a risk with your own life, but you're making the job of our first responders even harder. Police are very closely monitoring looting in areas that have been affected by the flooding. There's high visibility policing in those areas. At the end of the day, there is nothing more loathsome, nothing less Queensland than looting, and our police will use all of their resources necessary to keep those residents who've been affected by the flooding safe. We haven't had any reports of incidents with crocodiles, but it remains a concern. There are crocodiles in these parts and in these waters. To those who remain without power or without access, we know that it is a difficult and a frustrating time. Please know that we're doing everything that we can to get to you and to get you the supplies that you need. Today we're formally announcing that the Queensland Fire and Emergency Service Deputy Commissioner Mike Wassing will be the Deputy Coordinator for the recovery phase here in the state's far north from ex-tropical cyclone Jasper. He'll be responsible for coordinating disaster recovery operations, working with Jake Elwood from the QRA. Jake is best placed to describe that role because it's the role he played for us in the southeast Queensland flooding disaster. Deputy Commissioner Wassing has extensive experience. He played pivotal roles in the 2009 Black Sunday fires in Victoria and the 2017 Tropical Cyclone Debbie response. 80% of homes and businesses that lost power are expected to be reconnected by tomorrow evening, 90% by the 23rd, and our crews are working just as hard as they can to get as many people as they can reconnected before Christmas Eve. We're also announcing today that we've launched an appeal, a charitable appeal for Australians who want to contribute to those who've been affected by the flooding disaster. We're working with the Australian Red Cross, the Salvation Army, Uniting Care, St Vincent de Paul and Give It on this appeal. The Queensland Government has kick-started the appeal with a contribution of $1.5 million. These are trusted charities who we know will be able to get these funds to those who need it most. We've asked to Give It to focus some of the $100,000 we've provided to them on any children who might have lost toys that had been put aside for Santa. This is a chance for us to make sure that their Christmas is a little bit brighter than it would have been otherwise. And finally, Minister Watt will outline disaster recovery funding arrangements that have been agreed between the Australian and Queensland governments to provide loans in support of primary producers and businesses, but I'll let him make that announcement. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Premier. And having been on the ground now since yesterday afternoon, it's terrific to see such a hive of activity around the Cairns region and Far North Queensland in helping people who've been through a lot over the last few days. Any of you who've been here will have noticed lots of helicopters up and down from the airport. We've got so many ergon crews on every corner, you lose count of them, which is great to see that work happening with reconnections. But we know that we're really just at the beginning of this response and recovery phase, and there is an enormous amount of work yet to be done. The Premier's outlined to you some of the assistance the Australian Defence Force has provided in recent days, and I want to thank the men and women of the Australian Defence Force for the incredible work they've done. Dozens of evacuations from Wujal yesterday, with more to come today. The ADF has also airlifted dozens of emergency personnel from Townsville to Cairns to replenish the human resources here, bring fresh legs, provide a bit of fatigue management to people who've been hard at it for days. And we've also been providing aerial and flood imagery to help support Queensland Government decision-making. As the Premier just mentioned, today we're able to announce the third round of disaster assistance for affected Far North Queenslanders. So far, we've already triggered the joint funding with the Queensland Government for personal hardship assistance. Yesterday, you would have seen that the Prime Minister activated the Australian Government Disaster Recovery Payment and Disaster Recovery Allowance. And today, we're able to announce again joint funding between the Federal and Queensland Government for the beginning of support for farmers and small businesses who've been affected by this. I can see for myself that there's been a lot of impact on farms and small businesses around this region, and they need our support. So what we're activating today are freight subsidies being made available to primary producers in some of the hardest hit areas, and that's to alleviate the costs of moving stock and operating materials around. Hinchinbrook Shire Council has now been activated for funding towards counter-disaster operations and the reconstruction of essential public assets like roads and bridges. That joins a number of other councils that were already activated for that. We're also announcing disaster assistance and essential working capital loans for affected primary producers, small businesses and not-for-profits to assist with the repair and recovery of essential equipment and for loss of income. All of that assistance is being made through the joint Commonwealth State Disaster Recovery Funding arrangements, and as I say, is on top of the assistance that's already been announced. Can I thank the media for the work they've done so far in spreading the word about those payments? If I can ask you to keep doing so. I met people yesterday at Holloway's Beach who, because they haven't had power and phone reception, while that's still getting rectified, there are a lot of people who aren't aware of the payments that are available. So if you can assist us in that regard in getting that information out, that would be much appreciated. Just a couple of other quick things that the Premier didn't touch on. Clearly, to all who've seen it, we face a really massive clean-up exercise here in Far North Queensland. The water, the mud, the smell, it's going to take a lot of work from a lot of people, and I've already seen lots of volunteers out there helping along. What we've been able to do, working with the state government, is engage a number of major contractors to assist with that clean-up work. That is the process that we've often adopted in other parts of the country when we've seen massive disasters, and they will have people ready to go quite quickly quickly to assist the councils with those clean-up efforts. So we've just talked that through with councils this morning, encouraging them to take up that offer. And also, obviously, one of the key issues we still face in some of the remote communities is resupply of food, groceries, medicine, water. Things are starting to happen there, which is terrific to see, with roads beginning to resume opening. That will make that effort easier as well. But making sure that those communities have access to food, water and medicine is clearly a big priority as well. The last thing I just wanted to say is that it's already obvious that we're seeing the incredible heart here in Far North Queenslanders that many of us know exists, but we're now seeing on display. And just to give you one example, yesterday I was down at Holloways Beach and I ran into a bloke called Roscoe. I don't actually know what his real name is, but he's just Roscoe. Fortunately, he didn't suffer terrible flooding to his home, but he took in 10 neighbours and their pets, their dogs, their birds, all sorts of other things, to give them some emergency housing when they needed it. They're the kind of examples we're seeing right across this community, and I know it's that community spirit that will get Far North Queensland through. I might hand over to Minister Boyd if she wanted to add any of that.
Thank you so much, Minister Watt, and it's been great to be able to get here to Far North Queensland and see the situation on the ground. I bring with me Acting Commissioner Stephen Smith as well. We're seeing the damage firsthand and the efforts of our mighty frontline and Good Samaritans who are involved in this recovery effort. I know that Jake Elwood from the QRA and Brendan Moon from NEMA have been working closely with our teams to identify areas that need particular attention. From a QFES perspective, we've been managing to do 1,700 damage assessments. We've essentially reset the assessments since the cyclone, and we've started that clock off again. So we've got 1,700 damage assessments that has been done as a result of this flooding event. We're also rotating our frontline as well, which is giving those people who have been giving their all a reprieve. SES has an additional 144 personnel that have been deployed into the region, and they are going into impacted areas as well. Can I say, if there's any people who are in the community who need assistance, SES is moving and QFES is moving to from recovery into relief at the moment. So the triggers to be able to get those washouts in your home is actually through the Rural Fire Service and the Fire and Rescue Service. So jump onto the SES Assistance app or call 132 500 to be able to access that support. The Queensland Recovery Hotline is the best place for locals to call to be able to access financial assistance. The DRFA Round 3 funding is being announced today. That's disaster assistance loans that will help our small businesses and our producers. It will also help our not-for-profits. We've additionally got essential working capital loans that is there for our producers, our small businesses and our not-for-profits as well. There's, in addition to that, freight subsidies that folks are able to access as well, which is for our primary producers, and will be able to assist with the movement of essential stock and also the rebuild that they need as well. In terms of the effort that we have here from the front line, it has been absolutely exceptional. I was hearing firsthand just before around the critical role that our fire service, our SES and fire service have been playing in things like getting the water back on online here in Cairns. They're stories that we haven't had time to properly talk about yet, but I'm sure in the coming days we'll be able to. A truly heroic effort that has been happening here in Cairns and through the northern beaches. Of course, we're critically aware that further north the work continues and they aren't as fortunate enough to be as far placed away from this event as the people of Cairns are. So we're continuing to support them through the ADF, through our emergency services and through our essential financial relief to be able to ensure that our community can recover the best that it can.
Look, can I also express my gratitude and admiration of our amazing police, fire and emergency services, volunteers, SES, councils. There's been such an amazing team effort to get to where we are today, but obviously there is much ahead. So what we're starting to see is we're moving from what was response into this relief, and then some communities are already into recovery, and so that will move over time across different communities at different pace. Now, there are so many different impacts. So each community is impacted in very different ways, and each individual is impacted in a very different way. So I have isolation, inundation, we have people in towns, we have people in more rural and remote areas, and so we do need to make sure that what we do is nuanced to their needs. I guess when I look at priorities, because it is such a large issue, resupply is obviously the thing that is front and foremost on my mind, on our mind, to make sure that we are getting communities what they need to sustain them at the moment. And then obviously access becomes a very key issue, and once we have access, we can really commence resupply in a more earnest sense. After access, we can undertake those damage assessments. That's vitally important to make sure that we understand what has occurred and what needs to be done to help the community recover. And then obviously clean-up is going to happen at the same time. Now, in some areas that will be very swift, and I've already seen amazing efforts just locally here on clean-up efforts. But obviously in more remote areas it does become more difficult, and will take more support and more asset. And then we get into that deeper recovery phase. So you see, for example, on some roads there will be emergency works to get the roads just trafficable, and then we will work to make sure that they are repaired to where they were, or indeed in some cases better. So a long road ahead, much to be done, but my admiration to the communities. The one thing though I never forget in these circumstances is that we can tend to sometimes fixate on the damaged roads and the damaged houses, but actually what matters most is people, and this has been a very traumatic event for many, many people. It came at little to no notice, and so that also is going to take a long time to recover from, but we will. We always see the best of Australians in the worst of times, and this will be no different. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Nothing like turning up after having all the experts and giving all the information. So I'll keep my message relatively brief, and that is obviously, as we've heard from Jake, the recovery, it's varied depending on what areas we're working in, and it goes to show the diversity of our region. What is fundamentally important is that everything that is being done and needs to be done is getting done. There is strong cooperation at a local council. The state and federal governments are working well. I'm just disappointed you all can't sit in and see the amount of cooperation and the hard work that is being done by so many behind the scenes, and I want to reassure everybody in the community that is the case. But I also want to touch on, in a couple of weeks, I remember when Yazzie came through, it was 2 or 3 days, we had blue sky, and whilst it left significant damage and there was significant infrastructural damage, what we're going to need is we're going to need to have our tourists back. Now, I don't want to start talking too early, but in a couple of weeks' time, we have some of the best assets up here in the world, and we'd love to see as many people coming back, because that's one of the things that is going to help our region. Yes, we have significant infrastructural challenges, and that will take months in a number of areas, and we will continue to work. But in the short term, talking to the Mayor in Port Douglas this morning, he was indicated that Port Douglas itself is pretty much intact, and they're very keen to get tourists back, and the same thing applies down here in Cairns. The Premier, myself and others will be meeting with the tourism industry, but one way you can help is in the next week or two is to start coming back. I know Tourism and Events Queensland have allocated additional funds to ensure that we get the appropriate marketing. All marketing for the destination has been suspended for the obvious reasons, but we will be ramping that up. So we're looking forward to seeing some people, to seeing you all come and visit us here in the tropical north in due course. The other thing I wanted to touch on was there are a huge amount of volunteers out there in our community doing a wonderful job. Talking to Health earlier this morning, can we please make sure you have closed shoes. I know up here it's not the traditional wear in the heat, but we need to take into account closed shoes, long pants, long sleeve shirts and gloves. The bacteria out there in the tropics is significant, so we want to keep people safe while they're making their contribution. And I just want to say once again, thank you to the amount of the army of people out there in so many areas who continue to make a significant contribution to our community. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll keep my comments brief because I know people are keen to get to questions. Senator Nita Green, and I'm the local senator here in Cairns. It's good to see you. I just wanted to reiterate what others are saying, that this is a complex weather system that we've dealt with, and so it's a complex recovery that we're dealing with at the moment. There are parts of Cairns that have bounced back and are in really good shape. There are parts of Cairns that are not, and there are parts of our region further afield, whether it's in Port Douglas or Mossman, whether it's up towards Cooktown and of course Wujal Wujal, that are still in a response mode and will move to recovery mode very quickly. But this is going to be a complex time, and we are really working hard to get to those people as quickly as possible. I just wanted to say that what I have seen out on the ground over the last 2 days when I've been able to get out of our house and into the suburbs is that I've seen some incredible mateship and people just digging in and helping out, whether it's the evacuation centres that I've been to, whether it's the donation centre that's been stood up down at the Cairns Yacht Squadron, people jumping in their boats to take things out to Machan's Beach, people are getting together to clean up down at Camarunga. It has been amazing to see our community band together, and I know that we'll see those same acts of kindness and mateship across the region as we start to clean up. And finally, can I say to the rest of the country who are watching on, our community up here, we are really tough and we are really resilient, but we really do appreciate you standing with us, and we feel that here. As Michael said, we will be back in business really soon, and when we are, we can't wait to see you. So thanks.
Thanks, Premier. Look, from a Fire and Emergency Services point of view, I just want to say a few things in terms of acknowledging our staff and volunteers across State Emergency Service, Rural Fire Service and Fire and Rescue Service who have been doing remarkable work for an extended period of time now, but also thank our partners in the community for their support. It's been incredible and we're very grateful for it, and we continue to be grateful for it. We are working through rotations to support our local workforce and to provide additional capacity through the impacted areas, and we'll continue to do that through recovery. And that's important for people, for locals, to be also able to get a break. We have moved, and gratefully, into non-life-threatening types of calls, so non-urgent calls. And our focus in the coming days is around damage assessment and supporting washouts and other recovery activities. And we'll continue to do that for the long haul. We have been here through the event and we continue to be here through recovery, and we stand with North Queensland through this period. Thank you.
Before we go to questions, can I just clarify something I said earlier? I don't want anyone to misinterpret my comments. Obviously, this disaster hasn't affected any of Santa's toys. They're all safely in the workshop. We were just concerned there might be some gifts under Christmas trees already that might have been damaged, and if that's the case, that's where we've asked Give It to help out. We're otherwise happy to take questions.
You're talking about damage assessment, obviously is quite widespread, 1,700 assessments. Do we know roughly how many homes you destroyed, how many damage? Obviously it's still early days.
Yeah, it is still early days. Thank you for the question. As of 6 p.m. last night, I'm advised that we have one premise that is destroyed, 57 severe, 187 moderate and 226 minor. Of course, the crews are out there working very hard at the moment to continue those assessments, and we presume that a lot more assessments will be coming through today. Some of the areas that we're hoping to get our staff out into are areas that we know were heavily affected, so we predict that those numbers will jump significantly today, particularly in the severe and the moderate categories.
What areas and more sort of the regional parts of the site?
I might throw to the Acting Commissioner for that question, if that's okay.
Look, our area of focus is at Northern Beaches, Markins Head, Holloway's Beach, all of those areas. So teams are working through that, but we've got teams doing damage assessment right across the impacted areas. So numbers will increase today, as the Minister said. But our focus is to get out, capture that as quickly as we can in order to inform decision making moving forward.
As people are left without homes, especially in Woodville and Cooktown, people are worried that they'll start coming to Cairns. What is there being done in terms of emergency accommodation for people?
So in the first instance, we have the evacuation centres available, but they are only ever very short term. We will then identify temporary accommodation for them. And if required, longer term housing. So we have well-established processes for doing that. We know that the evacuation centres can only be for that crisis period, and we will continue to get people into more stable accommodation as quickly as we can.
On this 85-year-old man, are you expecting him to be found alive?
I might ask police to address that, but we have teams out looking for him, very concerned for his well-being, especially now that they've been able to access his property and can't find him. Do you have anything to add to that, Sonia?
I'd just like to assure the community we're doing everything we can to search for him. We do hold grave concerns, and we would ask any member of the community, if you have any information to provide, please call Police Link on 131 000.
And it was just mentioned that there are 35 localities isolated. Are there food drops going into any of those places, and how long do you think that might have to continue for some of those spots?
So we're working very closely with our local disaster coordination centres in those affected areas, and it's certainly a priority. We have our emergency management coordinators working very closely to support the operations on the ground.
And the Premier mentioned that there was monitoring of looting. Does that mean there have been some instances of looting or not?
We're aware that that's a major concern for the community in situations like this. We have high visibility patrols in areas where police can access to make sure that we are being very proactive with offending in those areas.
But yeah, no instances of it at this stage.
I've had no reports of it, no.
Just on the evacuations at Woodville, do you have an update on how many people have been evacuated today or will be?
The situation is unfolding as we speak. We know that we need to support the Woodville community and evacuate them into Cooktown today. We would hope that by the end of today we would have completed those evacuations.
And just confirming, no other evacuations need to take place across those 35 communities, just Woodville?
Woodville is our major concern, but at the moment we have police in helicopters entering our isolated communities to look for people and to make sure that they're safe. If police find people on the ground and they need to be moved, then they will be evacuated using those helicopters.
And emergency services, or emergency management, Minister Murray, what I just asked you a question. You mentioned that you're engaging contractors just with the cleanup, so the big cleanup. Just as an example of one of the costs of this that's going to presumably billions of dollars, have you got any idea of how much you're going to be spending just on contractors?
Again, I might get Jake Elwood to fill in some of the detail, but I mean, I reflect on some of the other disasters that have occurred since we were elected that are of this scale, and it can easily be in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars when it comes to just clean up alone. We are looking at a very expensive repair bill. There is no doubt about it. You know, the infrastructure assessments have only really just begun. There is going to be big dollars involved in repairing some of those roads and bridges across this region. But if you wanted any more detail on the clean-up and the contractors, Jake Elwood's probably best placed to do that.
Murray, just while you're there,
Yeah.
I was speaking to some of the residents this morning, Holloway's Beach, that their frustration was one mate in particular, the flood was rising. They rang SES. They were told to ring the police, so they rang the police, and they really just didn't know what to do. And the other residents were saying that before there was any alert messages sent by SMS, they were already standing in floodwaters up to their chest. Those messages came way too late.
It's probably, again, best if I get one of the state people to respond on the emergency alerts, but I made this point yesterday that This weather system, and you would appreciate this, Gary, knowing a lot about the weather yourself, this was an incredibly unpredictable weather system, and I do have confidence that all of the authorities, federal, state and local, acted as quickly as they could with the best information that they could. And as I said yesterday, I'd reflect on the fact that at this point in time, we haven't had any reported fatalities or injuries. There's obviously concern about one man, but that is a pretty remarkable effort from all of the emergency authorities to get information out. Whenever we have a disaster of this magnitude, we always review it, we always seek to improve, and if there are improvements to be made, then we'll do that. But if you wanted any more detail on alerts and stuff, I'm probably not the best person.
It was record-breaking,
yeah,
no doubt.
absolutely.
They're just the questions that you will get from residents.
For sure, for sure. And I was in Holloway's Beach yesterday afternoon and getting those exact questions, yeah.
Are there systems that you know of that need to be improved with the bomb, or is it something that simply could not be improved?
Well, again, I think the BOM always take the opportunity to improve their modelling, but as you heard from the BOM representatives yesterday, this was a very unpredictable system, merging weather systems in different parts of the Cape that resulted in record-breaking rain in a part of the country that is known for very heavy rainfall. One thing we are doing as a federal government to improve messaging services, and this is partly in response to the South East Queensland floods that we saw last year, where again there were complaints about poor messaging getting out. We are introducing a new national emergency message warning system. We expect that to be available from the end of next year. It's something that federal governments had been asked to do for a very long time, but was never picked up and run with, and we are running with it. We had funding in the budget this year to deliver that. The idea behind that system is that no matter what kind of phone system you're on, whether you're Telstra, Optus, Vodafone, anyone else, messages can be sent to your phone that override anything else to get that information out quickly. So we're always seeking to improve the emergency warnings that we provide to people, and that's just one example of what we've got underway.
Can I just add to that?
Sure.
Sorry. Just in terms of our emergency response, I think it's worthwhile sharing that, of course, we know that the rain was quite heavy and aerial support was difficult during that period of time. But in terms of our first responders, they were literally picking people off rooftops, dropping them at higher rooftops to be able to return to people in zones where the threat was absolutely that the threat was absolutely critical, and they would have lost their lives had the SES not had that triage system and the Fire and Rescue Service, that triage system to be able to go to those houses where there was imminent danger, to be able to pick those people off, get them to a safer zone, and then have them collected from those higher rooftops and moved on. This was an operation that was absolutely extraordinary, and it was because of the challenging conditions that existed, not being able to get that aerial support, but also the very fast and rising water that was happening in those areas.
And just on the donations, how can people access those?
So they can go to any one of those charities, so the Red Cross, St Vincent's, Uniting Care or Give It, and there'll be details on their websites about how to donate. We know that that's something that people right across Australia will want to do, make a small contribution to help those who've been affected by this disaster in the week before Christmas.
You spoke before about short-term and long-term accommodation for some people. I mean, that's realistic. Does that mean you have dongers being prepared to be sent up here, that sort of thing?
So we have a range of options available to us. Obviously, here in Cairns, there is a significant amount of hotel accommodation that's available if we need it. The Australian government has a new relocatable home program, which we're hoping to access, and I might let Minister Watt talk about that.
Thanks, Premier. Premier's right. Again, in this year's budget, we funded the beginnings of a national emergency management stockpile. You'll see that there's a bit of a running of theme here in what I've got to say, which is that we are introducing a number of firsts for the country when it comes to disaster management. We've always said, the Albanese government, since we were elected, that we needed to make sure Australia was much better prepared for disasters compared to the schmozzle we saw during Black Summer. Again, this investment that we're making in this National Emergency Management Stockpile, from memory it's around $10 million that we funded. I might be wrong about that dollar figure. But the first step is that we have already signed a contract with a group called Humanity Hut, based in Adelaide. who make available at very short notice temporary accommodation. It's not the kind of accommodation people can live in for 3 years, but they can live in it for 3 months. And we're already in discussions with the Queensland Government about making that available if they choose so. But I know the Queensland Government has resources as well.
With the flooding to be arrested, because mud will set after a period of time, are you going to be able to get to these remote communities quickly enough to be able to water blast and clear out that stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've even personally seen some of that clean-up work happening in some of the northern beaches already, but I've forgotten whether it was Jake or someone else made the point that, those remote communities are harder to get to, but again, we've already had discussions about whether there might be a role for the ADF in assisting with the clean-up in some of those remote communities, whereas those contractors who are being engaged might be more suitable for the more urban areas. So those discussions are actively underway. Again, up until today, the real focus has been on saving lives, and now that we've, touch wood, largely done that, then we can be really beginning those discussions in earnest. Yep.
We've heard resupply is a big issue now, and we've also heard Cooktown's running out of food and water as more people are coming in. What's been doing right? What's happening right now with resupply?
Okay, so in terms of Cooktown, the good news is now that the airport is open for business. So that actually, I guess, reduces some of the pressure, increases the capacity to get supplies in, and that is always the case, to make sure that there is at least one point of access, whether it is by sea, whether it is by air, or whether it is by road. It is those communities where you don't have that access, short of rotoring support, that it becomes more problematic, and so that is becoming now our focus, to make sure that they don't run short of supplies. Indeed. Well, the good news about Mossman is now it has road access. We all breathed a sigh of relief, because again, with Mossman having been cut off and with water having been an issue, that was a significant concern. So, and it still is. But again, if you have access, it provides opportunity to do so much more.
How many months are you estimating? How many months are you estimating this to run?
Look, these types of events are significant, and this is not a days and weeks. This will be months, and in some areas it could be years. And certainly for people recovering alone, it can take years just to get over it. So will be a long process, but we will work as quickly as we can to get communities back on their feet. That's the key, because if we get those short-term wins, it then sets conditions for people to be able to move on with their lives and to move forward.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.